Welcome to History 111, Lecture 24, The Bank War and the Panic of 1837. The bank war, as it's known, emerges out of wider issues concerning economics. Now, westward expansion needed easy and convenient credit, and that prompted a big public discourse on monetary policy, and a lot of the country fell into two groups: hard money and soft money advocates. Hard money advocates believed that all money should be gold or silver coin, or certificates redeemable for the same. Soft money advocates wanted to print more money to increase circulation and make extending credit easier, and this is what had crashed the state banks after 1812. Jackson, who was president at the time, personally incurred severe debts in a soft money crash in 1797 and hated the idea and refused to have any part of it. Now, to understand what this is really about, we have to briefly, in the simple terms, talk about why money has value. Now, legally, all taxes and other debts the government must be paid with money, whatever money happens to be. You can't pay your taxes in chickens. You must pay these using U.S. currency. Because people need U.S. currency to pay the government, this makes using other mediums of exchange impractical. For example, if you want to run a business that accepts only euros, this will be legal, although some states might ban that. However, you would have to convert your euro to U.S. dollar to pay your taxes. You would also need to convert your euro whenever you try to buy goods or services from someone else who only accepts a dollar. That means that the national currency is really the default. Even fiat money obtains value when the government makes it the only way to pay your taxes and debts. Currency, however, still requires confidence, and a lack of confidence does not make money useless. It just slows the economy and tends to make people invest in what they see as long-term safe investments. People, by and large, believe that hard currency, gold and silver coin, are safe investments because their value remains relatively stable. Now, the real issue here is metal versus paper. Paper is worth a combination of what the government says it's worth and how people feel about it. The value of paper can fluctuate rapidly, but metal, being a fixed finite resource, it doesn't. This limits the availability of currency, but it keeps its value stable over time. Currency shortages, though, can impact economies by making trade rely on barter or other inefficient means. So, what you are always risking is, if you use metal, you're risking not having enough and slowing the economy and damaging it. If you're using paper, you're risking having too much in circulation and having people believe that the paper isn't worth very much and then causing different market chaos. The key for a country is somehow hitting it in the middle where they have just the right amount of money in circulation. And this idea of metal versus paper is really what the debate is about. And the soft money advocates tend to be bankers and business elite who would really benefit from more currency in circulation. These are people who would benefit from cheap and easy credit, because with soft money you can do that. With hard money you can't. Now, Jackson is himself personally both anti-elitist and anti-soft money. Not only does he personally think soft money is a bad idea, he's politically opposed to the very people who advocate that policy. Now, the National Bank is due to expire in 1836, and everyone believes that Andrew Jackson is not going to support it. Now, the president of the National Bank is not going to help this situation out. He is going to use the bank's power and resources to buy favor and support for renewing the charter, because it's going to be a big political fight and everybody knows that. In 1832, Clay, Webster, and a few others come together and put a bill through to renew the bank early. And Andrew Jackson does exactly what everyone expects, and he vetoes it. So the National Bank becomes the hotbed issue for the 1832 election, and that was really what Clay and Webster had wanted. They brought it up early so they could make an issue out of it. Now, Jackson cannot legally abolish the bank until 1836, but he decides he's going to go ahead and kill it by removing all federal gold deposits from the bank. He had to fire two Treasury secretaries in a row who refused to do it because they believed it would destabilize the national economy. The third Treasury Secretary, who Jackson's later going to make Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, follows through and removes all the gold and deposits it in various state banks. Now, Beadle, the president of the National Bank, is going to retaliate by severely restricting credit and calling in loans, and that's going to set off the recession of 1833 and 1834. Now, this man believed that crashing the economy would ultimately force Congress to act against Andrew Jackson, and Congress does so. They censured Jackson. That's a formal reprimand. In other words, it's an official statement from Congress that they believe what Jackson has done is wrong and unacceptable, which falls far short of what some people were hoping, which was Andrew Jackson's impeachment and removal from office. Now, the business community eventually turns on Beetle National Bank and his strict credit policies when he starts giving out credit again without a recharter. That makes him look worse because he gave up. He crashed the U.S. economy for nothing, is what people saw, and the national bank dies as a result of all of this. Now, there are some really critical differences that are emerging over economics between the Democrats and the Whigs at this point. The Democrats are about economic opportunity and westward expansion. They're also anti banking and modernization, whereas the Whigs start increasingly talking about existing territory and developing industrial economy, and they're very pro banking. And these differences start playing out more and more regionally and really come to the forefront with the bank war. Now, we also need to remember that political parties tend to engage in a lot of pandering at this point. And so, in other words, they're going to take up popular or local issues not connected with their ideology, but they're going to do it if they believe that they can win votes with it. So, the Whigs, for example, are going to go anti Mason. The Masons are a fraternal organization. In other words, they're a group of people that come together for a common purpose, be that social, educational, or political. They're also an esoteric society. In other words, they keep much of their beliefs secret. That makes a lot of people suspicious. Now, there's a major anti Mason backlash following a murder, and Whigs take advantage of it to get more votes, and they become an anti Mason platform. Now, in addition, coming out of the bank war, there's a lot of religious and cultural dimensions to how people are voting. They're going to play out in the next election and ultimately lead to the Panic of 1837. Immigrants tend to be rural and come from societies based on land as opportunity, and they vote Democrat, who supports a similar platform. Evangelical Christians, however, tend to lead towards the idea of spiritual progress, and this parallels common ideas about material progress, so they tend to favor Whigs. Whigs also favor public schools, private colleges, charities, and cultural institutions, whereas Democrats are all about rural simplicity. They want to avoid corruption. They want to avoid the Republican ideas, as I see it, that come from modernization. And one thing to keep in mind is the factory system on which modernization is based is about the least egalitarian thing in existence. For Democrats, every farmer is equal. Every factory worker is a serf, with the factory owner being like a king. That, to them, goes against the principles of American government and American society. Now, the Whigs have a better defined, forward looking ideology, and they really are looking at what's going to be helpful to develop the American economy. And they're really looking at banking as kind of central to this, but they can't get behind a single leader. All of their major leaders are too compromised to win a presidential election. Calhoun, because of nullification, Clay because of the corrupt bargain, Daniel Webster because he had taken a huge amount of money in loans from a national bank to buy as part of Beetle's efforts to buy favors, and they ended up running several candidates against Van Buren in 1836. What sets off the Panic of 1837 is some events that happen right at the end of Jackson's presidency, some of which happen after Van Buren's elected but before he takes office. Now, what had happened was the federal government had a surplus due to land sales in the West, and it's the first and only time the federal government both had no debt and brought in more revenue than they spent. So it has two options. They could reduce tariffs, but that's really controversial because of the nullification crisis, and no one's willing to basically open up that can of worms again. Or they can return the surplus to states, which is what Congress decides to do. So states are going to spend money on development projects and really start to try to invest in the economy. But at the same time, the federal government's going to pull all the money out of the state banks. The only reason it had been there was to get leverage against a national bank, and with a national bank being gone, this is no longer relevant. Now, with all these development projects happening, this fuels large-scale land speculation, and the combination of that and the moving of the gold out of the state banks was that state banks were suddenly handing out unsecured credit. In other words, it wasn't backed up. What the banks had been doing was based on the theory that they could print money, loan it to people for development projects, earn back all that money when it's repaid in the loans and interest, and be able to replace the money that the federal government had deposited, because that's the way banks work. You put money in a bank, they loan it out, make a profit, and as long as the money's there when you want to withdraw it, it's fine. The problem is they're handing out all this credit, and the federal government, who is the big gold depositor, takes all the gold, so suddenly they have all this paper money that can't be redeemed. Now, on top of that, Jackson makes it worse because he dislikes the fact that federal land is being bought with paper money and issues an executive order requiring payment for federal land to be purchased with metal or with notes guaranteed with gold and silver. The problem is, all the gold is gone from the state banks. Now, the crisis happens itself when Van Buren comes into office. Now, it's a combination of factors, some of which are international, but it's blamed at the time by the Democrats and Jackson's executive order. Because what happens is people go scrambling for metal-backed currency, and it basically makes other money worthless since no one wants it, has no one's confidence. Everybody needs gold because they need to be able to pay the federal government in the currency it's demanding. And without the state banks having the large federal gold reserves, they can't pay those. So state banks go broke, states go broke, bread riots break out in different parts of the country, and you hit record unemployment. So Van Buren proposes a solution to the crisis brought on by the different things going on with banking at the time, and he proposes an independent treasury where money would be deposited independently and separated from the banking system. The treasury would only deal in metal and only issue treasury notes that were backed by their metal reserves, and importantly, they're not going to extend credit. The theory is this: if no private bank could have access to federal money, then they would have to be responsible and stop reckless credit and speculations. Government policy could no longer influence currency value and lead to crashes. Now, this is passed in 1841, but it's repealed the following year by Whigs who still want credit to be cheap and available. And it really underscores a fundamental difference in the opinion of how the role of government should be in economic development. Now, the Democrats are going to pay a very heavy price from the Panic of 1837. The Whigs are going to win their first presidential election. William Henry Harrison is going to become president, although he's going to die within 1 month. John Tyler, an ex-Democrat who was an anti-Jackson Democrat, is going to become president, and he's going to end up being expelled from the Whig Party. The reason being he blocked the Whigs' attempt to charter a third national bank following the repeal of Van Buren's independent treasury. So what's the big idea here? Well, first and foremost, this comes down to the big question: what is the appropriate role of the government in economic development? At this time, there's a lot of competing theories and a lot of reckless actions. Overall, this was bad for the American economy and for the American people. See you in the next lecture.